Shalom and welcome to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. This is a recording of a Rosh Hashanah sermon by Rabbi Rebecca Schatz.
One of my favorite things about this service and this space is that it's not just adults. And so I don't need you to take your kids out. I don't need you to make them sit quietly and silently and without moving. In fact, I hope that by them being here, that means that you'll be here. I just ask that if they start to scream or start to make noise around somebody who doesn't have kids and might want to be listening, sans children, that you just find a different place on the field to be able to listen. But I hope that you'll stay, and I hope that they will too. This is a difficult year to deliver a sermon because more than anything, I want to listen to you. This particularly challenging year has set all of us through myriad emotions, devastation and hope, brokenness and togetherness, mourning and celebration. So after a year of words, hoping they have the potential to heal, what I'd really like to do is sit in silence, feeling emotion as waves hitting my soul. And so I hope, though this is a hard year to give a sermon, that you feel like it is an important year to meditate into a sermon. If you want to listen by closing your eyes or by standing or by watching your kids run around in the back, great. Just allow yourself space to feel and to sink into the moment. This is not a sermon about this year explicitly, but rather a sermon about the human experience to grow and prepare for next year's. Shema Kolenu. Listen to our voices, God. We had a year, many moments of good that we have created and also challenges that we have experienced. On a recent flight back to LA, I experienced something for the first time. Out of the window to my left, the sky moving from vivid colors to thick black and suddenly a flash of light. After 2 or 3 more bursts, I realized I was witnessing a giant storm in the distance. It was a beautiful painting of colors as the sun set, punctuated by unexpected flashes of light bouncing off the cloud-filled sky and creating shapes in the black of night that could not be seen otherwise. It was awesome. But as my focus returned to my not enough legroom, I began to feel guilty. Guilty for finding myself in awe of a storm that could very well have been destructive to the earth and life below, or at the very least, delayed flights and created inconveniences for others. I'm sure we have all been caught in this kind of storm. It is very challenging, but from high above the clouds, looking down from the heavens, a storm was beautiful and inspiring, captivating, and divine. Sitting and watching the storm, I had a thought that I often have on planes. By being in and above the clouds, am I closer to God? Watching the storm, I felt the answer was yes, and yet, had I been down on earth experiencing this strong storm, my instinct would have been to pray to God to make it stop, feeling distant and scared and helpless. Perspective. We often think of Teshuvah as a way of repairing, resolving, and reconnecting relationships. However, what if our notion of Teshuvah is wrong? I'd like to suggest that Teshuvah is not a return to ourselves, but actually a shifting of perspective, an opportunity to see beauty in a place we may have previously overlooked, or to see room for healing that is needed to create better versions of our world in the future. With Teshuvah, we are looking backward before turning anew towards the future. With Teshuvah, we take inventory of who we are, not who we should be. But certainly a reframing of how our behaviors project what the world could be after us. So rather than return, we U-turn with the hope of making Teshuvah a new turn. Do prayer, tefillah, teshuvah, and tzedakah actually change our fate? Rabbi Lou asked this question in his book, This is Real, and You Are Completely Unprepared. The rabbis who came along later realized that of course they do not. The real change is in the way we perceive the world. So they changed the language of the prayer accordingly. Now we say teshuvah, tefillah, and tzedakah, ma'avirin et roa hagzera. The act of teshuvah is no longer seen as ripping up the evil decree. Now it transforms the decree, or allows us to traverse the decree, walk in it, and walk with it. Teshuvah doesn't change what happens, but it changes the way we approach wrongdoing, whether willful or unwitting. We no longer see things as evil, as the doings of powerful non-human forces. We see them as they are, the results of us, human beings. In a world where war feels close to our hearts and homes, through friends, children, colleagues, in danger, fighting, or grieving, I wonder, as I'm sure many of you do, what is the value of my teshuvah? How can I focus on my own brokenness when so much in the world is broken and so many in the world are suffering? The perspective of teshuvah should not be for my own sake and inward, but rather open-hearted, open-handed, outward, and welfaristic. Similarly, in an election year, our goal should not necessarily be to vote for ourselves, but rather to vote for our children, for our grandchildren. I would suggest that our teshuvah is not intended to change our world, but rather to focus our attention on a better future for the next generations. None of us is free from struggle. We are born with at least some inherited pain and brokenness. And as Jewish Americans, we are all familiar with, though perhaps not by name, intergenerational trauma. As a culture that has known tragedy and despair, we have all inherited certain of these traumas from previous generations. These instincts that guide our life choices based not on our lived experience, but on the hardships survived by our parents and grandparents. It's fused into our DNA, completely outside of our control. In a recent podcast on the 1840 website, David Bashevkin speaks to Rachel Yehuda on intergenerational trauma and healing. And David asks, when does the cycle end? He goes on to cleverly explain one of the laws of Shabbat around preparing hot items called kli sheni, a second vessel. Imagine preparing a cup of tea on Shabbat. The vessel that has the hot water boiling inside it is a kli rishon, a first vessel. A pot or a pan that has been heated on the fire. The kli sheni is the cup into which the water is poured. The halachic difference here between a kli rishon and a kli sheni is that the kli rishon, that kettle, had the direct heat, and the vessel became heated from the fire or the electricity directly. Therefore, it retains its heat for a long time and can cook whatever is placed in it, such as tea leaves. The kli sheni was not heated directly. Think a mug. So the water cools down when put inside the vessel. Thus, a kli sheni is okay to drink from because it is not capable of cooking. The heat has dissipated. David continues this metaphor by saying, we keep on pouring our traumas into the next generation. So are we stuck in this? Rachel responds with admiration for this example because it suggests that even as traumas are passed between generations, it is in fact diminished. She shares if our parents or grandparents suffered because of the things that happened to them and they develop ways of getting through it or surviving it, then what is passed to us are some of those survival and coping strategies, so that what we retain is a form of ancestral wisdom, which again, it could be a mismatch between our current environments, but the intention, I think, is to prepare us for the worst. When the worst occurs, those gifts might help us a great deal. Teshuvah is a way of changing the perspective on what needs to be worked on and why. a process of tempering, taking hold of our piping hot trauma and pain and challenges and pouring them with care and tenderness into a new vessel for a new year. A cliché. Sure, if I work on part of myself, I will grow to be a better person for future relationships. However, what if the idea of Teshuvah was less about fixing and more about recognizing, holding and only repeating that which serves us? We are, each of us, our own Kli Rishon, but it is up to us how that Kli Sheni receives nourishment. In the book and recent movie depiction, it ends with us. The Teshuvah that is done is a recognition of Teshuvah done well. The book, written by Colleen Hoover, was titled in reference to the cycle of domestic violence that the book's main character, Lily, is determined to end for the next generation. Her mother before her was in an abusive relationship, and she did not see the signs of her own marriage becoming harmful until it was unfortunately obvious. The book explicitly explains how the character ends this cycle for herself by healing her own trauma without throwing the experiences away, but cooling down the next generation's acquisition of generational narrative. Therefore, while still in her labor and delivery room, Lily tells her child in her arms, "It ends with us," and their new life begins. Teshuvah is doing the work to end cycles, not only to repair our mistakes and heal our wounds, but to mitigate the harms we might pass along in future relationships and generations and retellings of history. The practice of Teshuvah is modeled for us in Torah in the relationship between Moshe and God. As Moshe is challenged and his humanity causes him to slip up on multiple occasions, God's response paves the groundwork for Teshuvah as a fundamental tool for establishing community, legacy, and healthy relationships. In Deuteronomy chapter 10, we learn, "At that point God said to me, Moshe, carve 2 stone tablets, and I will write upon those tablets the words that were on the first tablets, which you shattered, and put them in the ark." Put the shattered tablets in the ark. According to Rabbi Eben Leder from Hebrew College, this is Moshe's telling of the slow process of reestablishing the relationship between God and the people following the betrayal of the golden calf, and of the humble and much quieter offering of the same commandments for the second time on a set of tablets Moshe carves as co-author to replace the first set he had shattered in anger. Reestablishing relationships for the future, not the present, in Teshuvah. Putting the broken tablets in the Ark of the Covenant is to put our failure at the heart of our connection with God, Rabbi Leder says. A threatening way to establish, to grow any relationship. And yet, it is important to remember our failures, but not to set them at the heart of our encounters. Remember our failures, but not set them at the heart of our encounters. According to the Talmud in Masechet Yoma, the tractate which contains all the stories and laws of Yom Kippur, this holding on to both shattered and whole tablets distinguishes between reconciliation driven by fear, which has the great power of transforming intentional wrongdoings into mistakes, and reconciliation driven by love, which has the great power of transforming intentional wrongdoings into merits. Rabbi Leder concludes, the image of the Ark of the Covenant, containing both shattered and whole tablets, may be a symbol of such radical love and acceptance. If you were to open the Ark on our people's journey, there would be whole, beautiful, inscribed commandments on stone and dust, rubble and jagged shards. Which would you see first? Would you first notice that which was awesome and whole, or would you first focus on that which was broken and preserved as broken? Learning from our perspective of seeing these 2 depictions of tablets allows us to understand our need for Teshuvah. Do we focus on our broken pieces, urge to mend them, or do we focus on that which we excel at and use the broken pieces to remind ourselves of how we affect change from past experiences? The broken pieces of Torah, or the broken pieces of ourselves, can seem useless. What are we supposed to do with jagged shards of pottery or painful stories of our past? And yet, the broken pieces might be even more important than those that are whole, or else, why would God ask Moshe to hold on to them? Similar to the modern-day notion of taking broken pieces of glass from underneath the chuppah to make household items for Jewish rituals, such as a mezuzah, or a honey jar, or a salt canister. It's about perspective. One could choose to see a sunset and mourn the day leaving or the darkness arriving, but instead, many of us choose to relish in the colors that the sky turns as day becomes night. One could choose to see someone begging on the street for money as frightening, or one could choose to see the person who might have encountered some difficult moments and now who demonstrates humility and vulnerability as they ask their fellow human being for help. One could choose to dwell in their mishaps or misfortunes, or one could choose to use those experiences to create a better life for those they will impact in the future. We are each of us an Aron, holding our broken pieces and our whole Torah, written and waiting to be understood. And yet we are each of us still a Kli Rishon, needing to heal and cool down for the Kli Sheni that we pour our life and our love into. That cooling and healing process is Teshuvah. Not repair, not removal, not dismissive, but changing the perspective to grow. Rav Kook described Teshuvah as an underlying force that influences all aspects of life. Rav Kook, the first Ashkenazi chief rabbi of Israel, posited that Teshuvah is a powerful force, not limited to the failings and triumphs of the individual. It applies to failures and successes of the nation and the entire universe. This is why today's actions are a prayer and a teshuvah of the world we hope, wish, and pray for our children. In November, I was in Israel on a mission to feel, to witness, to heal, to hug, and to hear post-October 7th, to face and to feel our brokenness without any glue for repair, just hugs and ears for helping to heal and reimagine those whole pieces of our people. The trip was about doing and witnessing. We drove to the south and listened to horrific stories while standing inside remnants of destruction and assault. On our bus ride from that location, from Kibbutz Kfar Aza to the rabbinic army base of Shura, I woke up from a brief nap to a beautiful image. I woke up with my head leaning on a window, and as my eyes opened, there was a tractor and a mound of earth with a man wearing a kippah on the right, shuckling front and back, and a man kneeling on a rug to the left, touching his forehead to the earth and standing up with his hands by his face. Seemingly both praying their afternoon prayers while in the middle of a mundane job. My mind began to race. Only in Israel, I thought, would you see two such different ambassadors pause their physical labor to acknowledge their connection to the divine. And then tears welled up in my eyes as I focused in on the harmony, the peace, the shared experience that this image in time painted for an ideal future. I have no idea of their culture, of their politics, of their nationality, of the flag they wave at home. I do know that they are men of God, men of hard work, and at least minimally respectful of each other's religious connection. I saw two of history's estranged stepbrothers repairing our shared world. At least that was my hopeful perspective. So how do we put this in action? How do we shift our perspective of Teshuvah this year, this moment, this Rosh Hashanah, where transition feels so hard, leaving a year that we will not leave for a long time, and so desperately needing to enter the next year? What can we do to shift our Teshuvah perspective? Rabbi David Wolpe, in a conversation with Rabbi Lizzie Heidemann as part of the Maimonides Fund pre-High Holiday Sermon Series, shared a teaching by John Rawls, who said, if you're about to be born into a society and you don't know who you are going to be, you might be white, you might be black, you might be male, you might be female, you might be straight, you might be gay, you might be non-binary, you might be poor, you might be rich, you might be Jewish, Muslim, Palestinian, Israeli. You have no idea who you are going to be born to be. What kind of society do you want if you don't know who you are going to be? Though Rabbi Wolpe used this from the Bima to tell his congregation years ago to vote for the candidate who is going to create the kind of society you would want to live in, I want us to hear Rawls' words as a charge to do Teshuvah for the world that we want our children to live in. Heal the traumas for the challenges that you hope your grandchildren will never experience. Teshuvah begins with us answering the questions of how we are planting the seeds for our forests to bloom and thrive. What ends with us this year? Hatred based on someone else's words or interpretation of reality? Compliance to narrative based on past experience rather than growing in today's news stories? Yelling into our own bubbles of conformity rather than vocalizing our concerns to make a change? Silence for fear of rejection, disappointment, or challenging conversation? Judgment based on demographic, gender, culture, or religion without asking questions? I hope so. I hope all of that ends with us this year. And what ends with you? What ends with me as individuals this year? A particular behavior, a destructive relationship, greed, envy, resentment towards something that's not serving you, cyclical actions that are no longer useful to your community or society? I began with a bit of a lament that listening and simply sitting back and hearing would be much easier than coming up with the right words to say at this moment. And when I think back on this entire year, many words have been shared, many prayers, psalms. We have sat through vigils and memorial services, and we have shown up to protests. And I don't know about you, but with all of those words, the brokenness in the world seems so much bigger than me. But I can change. I'm obligated to change. I'm obligated to heal myself for those who come after me. This is all more than I can hold. And so Teshuvah as perspective changing hopefully feels manageable and productive for all of us. Teshuvah is never a choice. It is an obligation to shift our perspective to focus on how you want to leave the world. After a year of upheaval in so many ways, it ends with us. Teshuvah is demanded of us to right our wrongs, to end our cycles, to cool down that which has become overheated. We have the power to heal and shift, and we have the power to create and grow. We have the power and the imperative to do Teshuvah. We can each make our lives better for the next generation. In our healing, we lay the groundwork so our next generation will thrive. Shana Tova.
You have been listening to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. If you enjoy these podcasts, we invite you to write a review on the Apple Podcast site or wherever you get your podcasts. For more information about Temple Beth Am Los Angeles, go to tbala.org.